Good day everyone, and welcome to the channel. It's Londononion here with another Back 4 Blood character build. And the character we'll be building in this video is... Heng. Now generally I would say cleaners fall on a spectrum of roles/categories ranging from offensive, supportive, and defensive. And of course the degrees in between, as we will uncover throughout the series. Just for consistency, I will define offensive roles and perks as abilities that are directly intended to increase damage or bolster offensive capabilities. Defensive roles and perks will be defined as abilities that directly increase survivability from punishment. Lastly, supportive roles and perks are defined as alternative skills that can be instrumentally used for offensive or defensive purposes without a defined intention for either polarization, but are ultimately a helpful perk for one's team. First, we will have a brief overview of our chosen cleaner, go through relevant cards that will either synergize or compensate with their attributes, and conclude with what I consider to be the main tactics to maximize the use of their abilities, as well as my closing statements. Now for those who were present during our weapon reviews and deck builds, each weapon-centered deck build came with character designations. Our format with character builds will be similar, but with more priority to a given character and maximizing their role on a given team. So starting off with the character attributes of Heng. Heng has the unique ability to ping nearby hive entrances, prepper stash doors, and attachments. He has an alternative ability to create a random accessory upon receiving damage, and the odds increase commensurately with the amount of damage he receives. Lastly, he has a team effect of a 5% reuse chance for all accessories. Now in regards to our spectrum, it is the attributes that we will use to designate each cleaner. In Heng's case, I would classify his scouting ability as a supportive perk, his damage reactive accessory drop a supportive perk, and his accessory reuse chance a supportive perk. With that said, Heng, similar to Carly, is a hardcore supportive cleaner. Now in regards to card selection, we can compensate with the more defensive and offensive cards, and we can synergize with more related and compounding cards depending on needs and playstyle. And naturally there is the option of creating some sort of a mixture or specialization. But if you ask me, a quintessential cleaner is not one that is good at everything, but one that fulfills their role in the best manner to aid the overall effectiveness of their team. So starting ourselves off with his deck build, because of his designation on our spectrum, he is one of the more open-ended cleaners as a supportive type, and can be morphed into multiple types of builds. However, Heng's skill set, in this onion's opinion, is not a clearly defined one, but is mainly centered around creating a series of small advantages for himself and his team, but with a particular focus toward accessories within each category. If Hoffman and Carly decided to have a child, Heng would be the strange mutation born, with similarly oriented but slightly mutated ability triggers. Heng is the cleaner of luck and chance, but with the probabilities in his corner, compared to the other cleaners that is. As stated in our previous videos with Hoffman and Carly, Hoffman is a cleaner of contingency and preparedness, Carly is a cleaner of being prepared for everything without having everything, while Heng is a cleaner of reactive solutions and pathfinding. This is evident in his scouting ability of useful items and potentially pathways. His reactive solutions are evident in his response to taking damage and potentially being able to double down on meds, offensive throwables, or quick slot items. But this will lead us into his tactical implications, which we will cover later in our discussion. Moving on to our card selections, our first group of cards will be synergistic with his category and skill set, while the second group will be oriented toward his loadout. So our first card is Food Scavenger, which adds a moderate amount of food items to the maps, and food items restore an additional 3 health. Next, Magician's Apprentice grants an additional 10% chance to reuse accessories after being used. Following, we have Pinata, which grants a 10% chance for Ridden to drop an accessory when eliminated with an accessory. Pyro increases fire damage by 100%, and kills with fire grant 3 temporary health. Flammable objects can also be sensed. Next, Out with a Bang grants an extra life and has a team effect of dropping an active pipe bomb upon death or incapacitation. Offensive Scavenger increases the spawn rate of offensive throwables and are more easily sensed. Defensive Maneuver grants 25% damage resistance for 3 seconds upon sustaining a hit for 15 or more damage. Synergizing with this, I employ True Grit, which allows one to heal 10 units of health over 5 seconds upon sustaining a hit for 15 or more damage. Moving on to the loadout-based cards. Our first selection is Admin Reload, which allows one's weapons to reload when stowed away. Next, I employ Highwayman, which grants a 5% chance to spawn ammo, a Molotov, or a bait jar upon eliminating Ridden with a secondary gun. Next, Fill 'em Full of Lead, which increases fire rate and damage by 1% and swap speed by 5% for every quarter second spent firing. This buff maximizes at 20. Synergizing with this card, I employ Suppressing Fire, which grants a 40% chance to slow Ridden near a given target by 50% for 5 seconds. Shredder increases bullet damage by 1% for 3 seconds for every landed round, and will stack 15 times. Tactical Vest increases rifle ammo capacity by 30% and increases damage by 10% with assault rifles and LMGs. Lastly, Ammo Belt increases ammo capacity by 50% and reload speed by 15%. Overall, Heng's reuse possibility with accessories gets buffed to 15%. Provided all damage card conditions have been met, Heng can theoretically inflict an additional 45% damage while using LMGs and assault rifles. His reserve ammo, particularly for assault rifles and LMGs, will increase by 80%. Now, this build, I would say, not only augments Heng's core skills, but also gives him more of an offensive edge, and there is a reason for this, which I will cover a little bit later. In addition to being his team's Pathfinder, or at least one of them, nudge to Carly, he's also a wild card in having the ability to provide random accessories and ammo, not just for himself, but his team as well. Looking at his deck build, whether he is using a secondary gun, offensive throwables, or taking a sacrificial stand, he can provide resources for everybody. Fair to say though, with varying odds. This is also why I employed Food Scavenger to supplement his ability to provide for his team. Looking at our spectrum quickly, although Heng is a support character at his core, he balances out by playing into the restorative and offensively supportive areas. But this will transition us to the tactical implications of Heng and his placement on a team. Now, as I had stated earlier, Heng's build, though supportive at its core, was given more of an offensive edge, and his build naturally implies use of an LMG and using a secondary gun as opposed to a melee weapon. Now, although he has an offensive edge, Heng is not a particularly hard hitter to start, but a reactionary hard hitter. With Fill 'em Full of Lead, Suppressive Fire, and Shredder, Heng gets stronger as there is a greater demand for his offense. Continuous fire with an LMG typically is reserved for tough targets or numerous enemies. As he continues to fire, his damage increases and his odds of slowing targets also increases. The longer Heng remains in combat, the more dangerous he becomes, even if he should sustain damage himself, because this only increases the odds of offensive accessories dropping. To top this all off, should he become incapacitated or die, he will drop an active pipe bomb, and provided there is a crowd, not only will they be eliminated, but they are likely to drop another offensive accessory. With his increased swap speed, switching to a secondary will create a lull in firing pattern, but will then increase odds of dropping more useful accessories. To supplement, Food items around the map slowly but surely augment their consumers in every fashion, whether it is damage, reload speed, swap speed, healing trauma, etc. In regards to team placement, given everything discussed on Heng's ability and build, I would argue that he is best placed in the alpha role. Now I know, in past videos, I had stated that I typically wouldn't recommend having an LMG at the front of a given team, due to how ammo heavy they can be. However, the key word is typically. Heng is far from typical, and his core skills, in this Onion's opinion, demand that he be up front. But we'll take this one step at a time. The Alpha is ultimately intended to be the chief navigator of a given cleaner team, and their focus is for the most part forward and peripheral. Alphas give the callouts, direct their team, and act as a first response to threats. With this in mind, Alphas also have the greatest likelihood of running into hazards, sustaining damage, and using ammunition. In this Onion's opinion, the Alpha and Major should be firing the most, while the other two provide supplementary fire where needed, and of course defend themselves and their team should foes slip through primary defenses. This saves on ammo, and reduces the odds of friendly fire. Now, most cleaners don't exactly benefit from receiving damage. Heng, however, seems to have this tied to his meta. Hence, I would argue that he has a greater orientation to reactive solutions. As Alpha, he might not have the same senses of Carly and foresight to avoid danger, but he will at least benefit from receiving the short end of the stick. Now, just because Heng is in the Alpha position, this does not mean he must only rely on his primary weapon. This Onion would argue that Heng is better off using his secondary as his primary and switching to his primary in the face of mutations, bosses, and potentially hordes. Since he is at the front, he will then have ample opportunities to create ammo, molotovs, and bait jars as per his card, Highwayman. And just to restate from our last video on Carly, Alpha does not mean being the best, but the best for that particular role. As an alternative, because of his sensing abilities, I would place Heng in the Major position. The Major acts as the Alpha's backup, with their focus mainly being forward and lateral. They pay attention to the areas the Alpha does not, while having a high prowess for combat. This is also why I figured Heng would be best fitted with an LMG and given an offensive edge with his deck build. The Major is primarily the Alpha's backup and can act as substitute for the leader position, but they are also the Minor's defender from head-on and lateral threats. While in the Major position, Heng can still deliver strong enough firepower as he becomes more dangerous the longer he is in combat. Metaphorically speaking, Heng can be likened to the very quote-unquote lucky Domino from Deadpool 2 of the Marvel Universe. Darwin, the mutant from X-Men First Class, though I thought his death was BS. Or perhaps Ferris Bueller from the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Each of them being inconceivably lucky and strangely creating perfect reactions, creating a beneficial outcome. Now, everything in this discussion can be taken with a grain of salt, as deck build combinations are too complex for me to fairly evaluate them. However, this is the build I prefer to use when playing on higher difficulties with Heng. Now, it is paramount to state that team maturity is ultimately what makes any deck work. And for those who were present during our last cleaner discussion, I'm using maturity as an umbrella term to describe each individual's general understanding of roles, navigation, character and weapon attributes, ridden/mutation deterrent tactics, resource management, and ultimately collaboration, as this is a team-based game. I would also argue that the greater one's team maturity is, the greater efficacy specializations, like the one we just went through, will have, as each person will have a greater understanding of what it means to operate as a unit without being overbearing or breaking rules. Carrying on, less maturity will likely demand more of a compensating build, so as to provide support where there are more deficiencies. However, there is far more to compensate with than there is to specialize with, and would create an unnecessarily long discussion. Now, Heng is only one piece of this giant cleaner pie, but this brings us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you guys for joining me on this one, and in our next video, the cleaner of discussion will be Charisse, and we will determine where she sits on our spectrum of roles. It's been Londononion, and I will see you guys next time.